Okay, welcome. So this is the third film, but really part two of our look into 1984. So we looked at a kind of tableau of what the society looks like from the point of view of its structure, the structure of its regime, class structure, so on. Then we read the first couple pages where the camera kind of comes down in onto Winston coming down the street and going into his flat and so on and so forth. And we start to get the kind of texture of this regime from the point of view of Winston. And we establish specifically what the problem is. And the problem is the absence of a full cognition or awareness of his real identity. And that's connected with the identity of the regime, which is concealed. His own past is concealed from him, and the identity of the regime and how it works and the mysterious forces behind it are concealed from him. And he's on a quest of of self-understanding, and the diary is this kind of site of escape from the regime so that he has the freedom to consider his own true identity. In this lecture, I want to focus on issues of the propaganda surrounding this regime that assists and is the tool, the mechanism, the instrument that conceals reality from people. One of the basic principles of this regime is that whatever the party says is truth. Because they have the power, you realize here the intimate relationship between truth and lies on the one hand and power on the other. If I have the power to make you believe whatever I want you to believe, the truth starts to have utterly no meaning, right? And if we're a being that is naturally curious of the truth, has the capacity to know, and desires to live in truth, then it is absolutely necessary for our own humanity, and I mean that in the deepest sense of the word, of what constitutes a fully human life, freedom, the ability to think for oneself, the ability to love who one seeks to love. It's absolutely essential that we have access to the truth, or things that can lead us to the truth. So you see why the truth is that important. And maybe I should step back a second. You know, how important do you think truth really is to you? Would you really care if you lived in the Matrix and it was all an illusion, but you still got your steak and your red wine, as in the movie The Matrix, and these nice things? So propaganda is the main technique, and it comes in to conceal the truth, conceal reality, to make an alternative reality that is a pseudo-reality. And the more specific techniques are, number one, Newspeak, the transformation of the language that eliminates the capacity to talk about certain things because it eliminates concepts. And by simplifying, one of the primary things Newspeak does is to eliminate concepts and words. And by doing that, it starts to restrict, obviously, the language that can be used. But what's that really doing? It's restricting our ability to think fully and to articulate our own experiences. Why do we need this great breadth of vocabulary in language? Because there's a great breadth of experience to be described by it. If we think about the basic descriptive function of language. And to the extent that words are eliminated, it's not just that we can no longer describe experiences, is that at a certain point we're no longer able to have them because we're not cognizant of their existence, because we don't have the words to express them, not just to other people, but to ourselves. So we're going to look at the details of Newspeak, and we're going to lead into that by the way in which this regime controls and edits history through propaganda. And this is exactly what Winston does as a member of the outer party in this administrative state, kind of bureaucratic administrative state, who works at the so-called Ministry of Truth, which is, of course, Newspeak, because what they do, it's really the Ministry of Lies that transforms history. But the whole notion of truth and lie start to become blurred, and we have this concept of doublethink we'll get to. And if what is the basis of truth? Hopefully, most of you are saying the basis of truth is self-evident. The truth is what actually happens versus what didn't happen. What happens is true, and what didn't happen is not true. In this regime, truth is based on power, and truth being based on power has nothing to do necessarily with what happened, because truth is what the party says it is, and they are able to do that precisely because they have the power to control people's access to the world in a profound, profound way. All right? In our third lecture, what we're going to do is turn to the book 3, and particularly the relationship, well, books 2 and 3, and the relationship between Winston and Julia, and the relationship between Winston and O'Brien. And strangely, in a very perverse and rather disturbing way, the love relationship between Julia and Winston by book 3 is displaced by a very unusual relationship between Winston and O'Brien, and there's a very clear kind of substitution going on there. That's rather disturbing. So we're going to address control of history, and what would we call the control of history? Well, we'd call it propaganda. What is propaganda? It's the use of information, or what's often called mis- or disinformation. Misinformation is something that is factually incorrect, like a mistake. And disinformation is factually incorrect information that is intended to be incorrect to mislead people. The boundaries between misinformation and disinformation are rather ambiguous. But perhaps the strongest word is disinformation, where a regime actively puts out false information with the explicit intent of having people believe that which is false, and then on the basis of believing what is not true, encouraging them or getting them to act in a certain way that the regime wants them to act in order to have better control of them. So propaganda makes a clear distinction between appearance on the one hand and reality on the other. Propaganda deals with the realm of appearances. It tries to make things appear as if they were true, despite what the reality of things is. Now, the whole predicate of this world is to confuse what the source of reality is. For everyone sitting there watching this video and reading this book, it's self-evident what reality is. Reality is what actually happens in the real world, right? But the party is going to say reality is what we tell you it is, and it changes as we find fit. And that's one of the most absurd things about this book. Things that are true in the real ordinary world outside 1984, when something is true, it is and always true. Like if I said the light switch was on at 7 o'clock, and in fact it was on, and the statement is consistent or represents or corresponds to the reality of the light switch, nobody can ever come along later and say the switch was not on at 6 o'clock, right? In this world, the truth changes as the party sees fit. So truth is just a word that the party gives to things. And what they do is they eliminate the evidence that that the switch was ever on at a certain time, and they'll fabricate evidence to the contrary, and then they'll say, well, it was obvious that the light switch was off during that time. So there's an appearance and a reality, a lie, and then the truth behind it. And this gets at something, this is an expression coming from Machiavelli that Machiavelli said famously, and he had some exceptions to what he was saying here, but this was an important observation that wasn't necessarily intended to be nefarious, but that politics and the life of society in general function on what he called the effectual truth of the thing. The effectual truth of the thing. And the effectual truth is what appears to be true and effectual. the thing that has the effect in society on the whole, what appears to be true is the thing that actually affects people to act and think a certain way, right? The real truth, if it has no impact on people's thinking, speaking, and decisions and action, then it has no effect, right? And this is one of the great dilemmas of society. We have a thirst for truth, but we also have a thirst for other things. We want to get all kinds of things, and the truth is not always convenient to us, satisfying all kinds of needs and desires, particularly for people in power, right? If the people in power are doing terrible things, but they want you to think through the ring of Gyges that they are a wonderful regime and you think they're wonderful, well, the truth is not their friend, so they use their power to conceal the truth, right? And of course, you're still sitting there thinking they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. The effectual truth of thing adds up to the expression, appearance is reality. Appearance is reality because that's what people take as true, and therefore they act on it. In a sense, they make the appearance real by living it out. You see the problem here. This is, and, this is, the word propaganda, before we had the word public relations, we call it PR, and before we had advertising, these are just different words for the same thing. It was called propaganda, right? Presenting a kind of image. And we find it relatively innocent in the world of advertising to create a kind of mythic reality that isn't real. And we all sit there and say, advertising doesn't affect us, and we know that it's contrived and fake, and on and on. But some things we're going to point out here is even in our own society, there are ways in which the media have very clearly just taken it as their modus operandi and their goal to create false realities to advance their own agendas. So in the PowerPoint here, I have two videos. Actually, there are more, but these first two videos deal with fake news in the United States. And when I say fake news, I do not mean something that a person of one political persuasion versus the other sees differently, and that for differences of opinion and interpretation, they're somehow different. What I'm out talking about is examples of completely fabricated news that simply is not what they told you it was. So fake news is real, and fake news is really fake. It actually exists. This is an example very recently dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, in which, and I can't show it because if I show it, then my video on YouTube will be get a strike for copyright infringement, and the video will be taken down, and I'll have to edit it out. So I can't show it to you, but you can go to the PowerPoint, and it links through this PowerPoint, the play button here, directly to the video. That's on YouTube, so it's a URL that's built into the PowerPoint. In this video, there is a special corona testing pavilion outdoors set up by a hospital, and CBS Morning Show is filming it. And it turns out that one of the hospital employees who was connected with and aware of this testing became a whistleblower and exposed the fact that, the people who were showing up in line to get the testing were not actual patients. And not only were they not actual patients, they worked for the hospital. And the news organization, CBS, told them to do this. So what did they essentially do? They staged a kind of movie in which there are all these cars lined up to get tested, and they wanted to have on camera lots of people getting tested to demonstrate the pervasive nature of the pandemic and that it should terrify you, and so on and so forth. And not only that, they showed hospital employees getting fake tests where they weren't really testing them. They were kind of like going through the motions of pretending to test them, right? And this is on video. Meanwhile, there were a couple actual patients in the car lineup, because people are supposed to stay in their cars because that's the best way to social distance, and we all know about that. There were actually patients who did want to get tested, and guess what? They were forced to wait a very long time because CBS had to set up this artificial situation. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about a really great book written by the historian Daniel Boorstin. It's called The Image, and the subtitle of the book is A Guide to Pseudo-Events. And he is a historian who has written about the development of the news media, particularly when television became the primary vehicle for news. And he coins an expression called a pseudo-event. And a pseudo-event is not only basically a fake event, but it's an event specifically created to be reported on, that if there was no news organization there to report on something, there essentially would have been no event. And that is exactly, it's stunning. This book was written in the late 1960s, and it is stunning to the extent that his description, I'll read some passages, characterize exactly what happened in this story. So that's a nice topical story for our times. Let's go to the next one, another one which I can't show you. Fake news is real. It's really fake. And here is a 10-minute clip from CNN. And this clip has long since been exposed, and people have talked about it online for a very long time, but it doesn't get much coverage in the media, which is stunning. You have to wonder why other media... Remember how the media presents itself. They speak truth to power. They're the fourth branch of government. They hold the powerful. They hold government to account. They expose things that powerful people want concealed. It is the issue of truth and power, right? If you have the power and you do naughty things, you have the potential power to try to conceal things. And the media presents itself as the kind of hero exposing the crimes that the powerful attempt to hide, right? And what do we have here in 1993? We have a bunch of journalists. This is during the first Iraq War, before some of you were born. And we're fighting over in Iraq and Kuwait and so on. And this was the first, this is really interesting because I got cable, my family got cable right around the time that the Gulf War broke out at the end of the summer of, I think it was 92, I think, 91, 92, something like that. And so it takes place in Afghanistan and, excuse me, in Iraq, and Saudi Arabia had missiles fired at it and so on and so forth. So these reporters, they claim to be in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and that bombs and missiles are falling near them, right? It turns out that they are in fact, and oh, this is great, they have palm trees in the background, they're trying to make it look like, and bombs are coming in, and air raid sirens are going off, and they're putting on their gas masks. Of course, Saddam Hussein was going to use chemical weapons against people, and so on and so forth. It turns out that they were in a television studio in Atlanta, Georgia, where CNN is based out of. And all along they are pretending to be in the Middle East with bombs falling on them. And when you watch this, obviously I didn't see this air live, but it's impossible to look at this with a straight face, but this actually aired on CNN. And can you imagine how, I mean, first of all, it's embarrassingly ridiculous when you look at it. And if you think that the media doesn't out and out deceive you at times, it's just, this is the evidence. This is the evidence. And if they could deceive you about this thing, what else would they be willing to deceive you about? So the famous line from the text in terms of propaganda that leads to the control of the people is, he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future, right? Journalism is essentially, it's a story about the news, but in a sense it's a story about past events, even if they're very recent. And journalism is very often described as the first draft of history. right? So one thing I want to establish here on the left, these terms. Newspeak is really the underlying technique of control in 1984. Newspeak is a language. Language is used to create narrative. History is a central form of narrative by which we understand our own collective identity and individual identity. And control of the past and control of our understanding of the world ultimately leads to mind control, right? So language control leads to, you could say, control of our concepts, control of our thought, which leads to control over stories, control over history, and control of us, right? All in a kind of indirect way, right? There are no physical shackles on us. This is perhaps, when you're shackled, at least you see that you're shackled. This is a world that's much more oblique in terms of its control. It's not direct. So here's the cover of this great book, and I really encourage, as an American citizen who should know what's going on in your own country, and you are going to know about what goes on in your country only through the news. And the news, it's just like the face of Big Brother. It reveals just as much as it conceals. And by presenting you one image, it also conceals something behind. So the book is titled The Image, right? What did we say in society? Everything is driven by appearances, and an image is an appearance. Society functions on the effectual truth of the thing, not the actual truth. What matters is what people actually believe, not what the truth is, because what people believe and the beliefs that they act on, those are the effectual truth. Those are the things that actually affect their conduct and their orientation in the world. So Borston opens the book by saying this. He says, in this book, I describe the world of our making, right? How we have used our wealth, our literacy, our technology, and our progress to create the thicket of unreality which stands between us and the facts of life. I recount historical forces which have given us this unprecedented opportunity to deceive ourselves and to befog our experience. Now, this is an interesting book. This book is not a dystopian novel. This book actually, is in a sense a celebration of American society. And he talks a lot about how the creation of an artificial or false reality through the media is, in many ways, it's kind of benign. Particularly the thing he focuses on is the thirst for news itself and the thirst for facts. This is interesting, right? The media actually sets us up for a thirst for facts, and it feeds us information. But to say that there are facts being presented is not to say that it is the truth, right? And one thing he dwells on is the development of the television, the image of television. And if you think prior to radio and television, your news comes through text in a newspaper, right? And everybody understands that there's a dubious relationship between what's said about the world and what really goes on in the world, right? Because I can say anything with language. I can make up any statement, and it may be consistent or correspond to a state of reality of the world, or it may be just totally contrived out of thin air. So we naturally have a suspicion of the written word. But when we got to the photographic image was so compelling that it can tell lies with truth, because the degree to which it has truth or detail or facts or empirical evidence to show through the photographic image is a kind of, it overwhelmingly compels our minds to accept something as true because it's there visually. But there's a way to present images that are fundamentally deceiving. You can edit something in a certain way and make it transform itself from true to false, or you could leave out context. There's an infinite number of ways that can do this. But he says we live, and this book is written in the late 60s, we live in a thicket of unreality. Now that's a perfect phrase to describe the world, the intellectual or cognitive world created in 1984, the citizens live in a thicket of unreality. With the key aspect is they don't know that they're living in a thicket of unreality. Our problem is that we get our understanding of the world in many ways through media. So we are living in a thicket of unreality, and how we get a reference point outside of that is not a simple answer. Because there's certain types of facts that, unless you're a special person behind the scenes, you just don't have access to. I read a page here that I don't have present, but he says this. He says, "The making of the illusions which flood our experience has become the business of America, some of the most honest and most necessary and most respectable business." Now, the source of the illusions, he focuses on two sources. One is advertising, and the second is media. And the boundaries between those are very ambiguous. "I am thinking not only of advertising and public relations and political rhetoric, but of all the activities which purport to inform and comfort and improve and educate and elevate us. The work of the best journalists, our most enterprising book publishers, our most energetic manufacturers and merchandisers, and most successful entertainers, our business guides to world travels, and our most influential leaders in foreign relations. Our every effort to satisfy our extravagant expectations simply makes them more extravagant and makes our illusions more attractive. The story of the making of our illusions, the news behind the news, has become the most appealing news in the world." What is he saying here? He says something very interesting that should, I think, scare everybody to some extent. We've bought into an illusion not because we're lazy, not because we don't care, not because we want to be ignorant, but precisely the opposite. He's drawing on the fact that human beings, a reasonably intelligent human being with an active mind, is curious about the world. We thirst to know about the world beyond our own front door. And it is actually that thirst for facts, for data, for information, right? Maybe not knowledge. Maybe that's the problem. There's a difference between facts, data, and information versus true knowledge and understanding, right? That thirst and curiosity is actually leveraged against us, because what does the media do? It satisfies or quenches that thirst, but it does it deceptively. And it's hard to tell how deceptive it is, precisely because it's so palpable, in part because of the live television image, right? The photographic, the moving image on the television screen. Now, if you don't think that the media would be willing to fundamentally misrepresent reality, and you just think this is a kind of conspiracy theory, I think the only way you can come to see the distortions in the media is really to be a keen observer of it, right? In some sense, some things that the media does are so subtle that you can only come to really appreciate and acknowledge what they're doing through, I can lead the horse to water, but you have to drink, right? But I will tell you that the degree to which we are manipulated by falsehoods in the media is profound, for all reasons, big and small. He continues. I don't have it up here, but I'm reading from the book. "We have become so accustomed to our illusions that we mistake them for reality. We demand them, and we demand there be always more of them, bigger and better, more vivid. They are the world of our making, the world of the image. The world of our making is a kind of virtual reality through the image, and it's false. Nowadays, everybody tells us that what we need is more belief, a stronger and deeper and more encompassing faith, a faith in America and and what we are doing. That may be true in the long run. What we need first and now is to disillusion ourselves. What ails us most is not what we have done with America, but what we have substituted for America. We suffer primarily not from our vices or our weaknesses, but from our illusions. We are haunted not by reality, but by those images we have put in place of reality. To discover our illusions would not solve the problems of our world, but if we do not discover them, we will never discover our real problems. To dispel the ghosts which populate the world of our making will not give us the power to conquer the real enemies of the world or to remake the real world, but it may help us to discover that we cannot make the world in our image. It will liberate us and sharpen our vision. It will clear away the fog so we can face the world we share with all mankind. Now, the simple point I want to make here, folks, is that this is a highly esteemed and astute historian who is telling us that the world that the media crafts for us is gobbledygook. Gobbledygook, right? That's good old speak for bullshit, right? And this man is writing in 1968. What is true of 1968 is triply true of the year 2020, right? So here we are on page 11. I'm not going to read everything here, but just the first couple paragraphs. There's a quotation from Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he came to America with Sigmund Freud's, a basic kind of toolkit of Freud's concepts, kind of boiled down, and he employed them in the industry of what was called public relations. Public relations is like advertisement and image creation, right? Talk about people have an image. You create an image for something. You create a myth around them. And you shape public opinion. Originally, public relations was called propaganda. And what was the problem of the word propaganda? It became associated with what the Nazis did with the minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, right? Who was the kind of organ grinder of the lies of the Nazi regime. So what was the first act of public relations or propaganda? It was to change its name to a name that was more innocuous, that would be accepted in the aftermath of the of World War II, and public relations would not be applied to propaganda, government propaganda, because of course we don't do that in the United States, right? We all know that. But rather it would be put in the service of things like advertising, right? And Bernays says this: the Council on Public Relations, Mr. Bernays explains, not only knows what news value is, but knowing it, he is in a position to make news happen. He is a creator of events. This book is called The Image, and the subtitle is A Guide to Pseudo Events in America. And the whole point is that news and the media do not report on actual events, but rather they fabricate events, not out of whole cloth, but through the way in which they report on things. They can shape things or spin things into something that they're not. And if you want to be a careful observer of the news, you need a lot of practice in watching television news to see in the way in which they distort things. It also means you actually have to read something other than one source or one outlet to get perspective, because they will report things differently. And in those differences, you'll see that there's a rub there, and one is more accurate and one less accurate. The intriguing feature of the modern situation, however, comes precisely from the fact that the modern newsmakers are not God. The news they make, the events they create, are somehow not quite real. There remains a tantalizing difference between man-made and God-made events. A pseudo-event, then, is a happening that possesses the following characteristics. It's not spontaneous. It's planted primarily for the immediate purpose of being reported. Its relationship to the, number 3, the relationship to underlying reality of the situation is ambiguous. And number 4, which I don't have up there, is usually intended to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, how is he distinguishing between man-made and God-made events? God-made events are what actually happens in the world, like that ultimately are not fully in control. Human beings are not fully in control of those events, or in some cases not at all. And the man-made event is not, it's not actually an event in a sense. It's a contrivance of an event that doesn't actually exist, right? And I'll just leave this book with this, is that he then goes on to describe a television report of a celebration, a parade that went on in a city in the United States. And he describes how it looked on television versus what it was like in person. And basically through the television image and the way it was filmed, the way it was cropped, who they shot, when they shot it, and the way they edited their footage, they were able to change the meaning of the event and what it felt like compared to what it was actually like with, it being there in person, right? And, the television is our telescreen. What do you think the telescreen is, folks? We get so much of our world and our reality through that screen, and to be a judicious a person able to discriminate what they're seeing is a very difficult thing to do. So in a moment we're going to turn to look at some pages that talk about the history of the regime of 1984, but the basic statement to keep in mind here is he who controls controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. So who is in control in the present controls the future. Now the question is, first of all, when we think about the concept of history, we talk about the past, when the Greek word for history is historia, and that's essentially where we get our word history. And history can mean two things that are noticeably different. The Greek word historia literally meant inquiry, and it meant simply inquiry into events, past events. To inquire into an event is by definition to inquire into something that's already happened, right? So it connoted looking into things that have already happened, and therefore things in the past. But this inquiry, which would be then manifest in language, one would represent in words that corresponded to what one could learn about the past, that would be the process of producing history, right? History was the telling of an account of the past. Now that's not how we typically think of history, and it's partly because of the distortions that have happened in our thinking about it in the last few hundred years. When we think of history, we think of the actual literal events as they actually happened in the course of the chronological past, right? But the very problem of history and knowing history is that it is all done through representation to people in the present, because as you're living in the present, the past and the future don't exist, except to the extent that they are represented in one form or another. So then the question is, how does control of the past control the future? Americans are always considered to not have a sufficient grasp or concern with the history of the world, but certainly the history of their own nation. Your past helps establish your identity. What's happened in the past, and also what you think has happened in the past, orients how you understand the world. I'll give you one example that's poignant and relevant. Got to be relevant when we teach, right? So CNN, they had a commentator on CNN about a week and a half ago, and he was commentating on the fact that there are a lot of people throughout a lot of the states who are getting very upset that their state is being shut down. They're not able to work. They're not able to provide for their children. They're not able to pay their bills. They're suffering. They're stuck at home. So people were coming out and protesting, saying, you need to open our state up, right? And also that they don't believe that the procedures the states have taken are actually substantively beneficial to dealing with the problems created by the coronavirus, right? And in part of these celebrations, many of these people were oriented toward conservative, although I don't know why that has to be the case, but they were celebrating American freedom, and many people had flags, right? Because for them, that flag, among many things it could represent, we talk about how symbols are mnemonics, repositories of ideas, it represented freedom, right? Plain and simple. I think everybody can at least understand with that if you don't agree with that. Or maybe you just don't know enough about the history of the nation to have an opinion, but you should have an opinion. So the flag represented freedom, and they saw what was being done to them as a fundamental violation of their core rights described in the Declaration of Independence and that are manifest in that symbol, and so on and so forth, right? And of course, it is the case that some of our most vital rights have been taken away from us. Now, you may think that it was appropriate. You might think it's not appropriate, but you should be cognizant that the right to assemble, the right to express your religious opinion by going to church, our nation is founded on these rights. And for them to be taken away, they should not be taken away for what Jefferson would have called light and transient reasons. You better have a very good reason to take away our ability to work. I'm sorry, but being able to work is a freedom to sell your labor and make money, make a wage from your work, right? The government is preventing people from selling their labor, right? That's a serious freedom. Okay. So the CNN commentator said, oh, it's so ironic, these people out there asserting their freedoms as America and that the country is born in liberty. He said it's so ironic because this country was not born in liberty. Its core principles are not freedom. Its core principles are slavery. And didn't you know that? Right? We've talked about this issue. We've read the documents coming from Alexander Stevens, coming from Frederick Douglass, and the like. So, but the clear thing is, believing that the history of your country is predicated on freedom or predicated on slavery is going to have dramatic consequences for obviously how people understand, and how they understand the world they live in is going to shape the future in very concrete and very palpable ways. So if you really think that our country is founded in slavery, your attitude toward a whole range of things in our society is going to fundamentally change. Let's take the obvious. You're going to think our whole democratic political structure is connected with slavery and therefore fundamentally flawed and needs to be thrown out. That's been a push in a certain branch of the politics for decades, right? So he who controls the past controls the future is not just some some poetic remark. It has real substance. Here's a quote to just make this palpable. This is from the director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, a man named William Casey. He said, "We'll know our disinformation campaign," there's that word disinformation, "is complete when everything the American public believes is false." When everything the American public believes is false. That's straight out of 1984. Now you're saying, what does a CIA director, CIA has to do with intelligence, gathering intelligence, and foreign intelligence at that. What does it possibly have to do with the American people and propagandizing them? And why would they ever want Americans to believe that which is not true? Well, that's a big question with a long answer. But one thing that was discovered in the 1970s, the CIA went through a very turbulent period, and that was partly because a document called the Family Jewels was exposed. It was a classified document that got leaked out to the media and was published. And in the Family Jewels, it was basically a kind of laundry list of some of the core programs that the CIA was engaged in that were not publicly disclosed to Congress and to the American people. The essence of democracy is consent of the people. If you don't know what you're consenting to, or that the actions of government are concealed from you, you're not really consenting. The people need to, this is the whole raison d'etre, the reason for being of the media, which is to make government transparent to us so then we can make good, informed decisions when we consent to vote for this person rather than that person, right? In the Family Jewels, a program was discovered called Operation Mockingbird, which consisted of the CIA either paying people in the media or actually having CIA agents go into the media and to become journalists, and some of them very, very prominent journalists. And there's an article, this is not conspiracy theory, folks, this is the real world. There was an article written by Carl Bernstein that explained the extent, and he named names. He didn't just talk about it in the abstract. He said this person, this person, this person, this network, connected in with the CIA. Carl Bernstein, of course, is one of the two reporters who broke the Watergate story. So he's got, robust credentials of truth-telling, right? That is a powerful article in terms of revealing what you would never expect in the United States, that the government was using the media to propagandize and tell the people falsehoods. Because once you're believing them what you want them to believe, you can control them. That's the key. It's all about control. Great little quote by Thomas Jefferson. I will add that the man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he knows nothing is nearer to the truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods and errors. He who reads nothing will still learn the great facts, and the details are false. Right? Now, what is Jefferson saying? That everybody should be ignorant and not follow the newspaper, not follow the news? No, what he's saying is that the newspaper is so strewn with misrepresentations or disinformation that the person who reads it is further from the truth than the person who doesn't, right? The person who doesn't read the newspaper is simply ignorant of what's true, and the fact that they don't read the newspaper, they're going to be pretty aware that they don't know the truth about a lot of stuff because they're not paying attention. But the person who reads the newspaper thinks that they are informed and thinks that they know, but the problem is what they know is not actually true, and that's they're not going to be aware of their own ignorance, and that actually becomes a kind of boundary or a wall that prevents them from knowing actually what the truth is. Now I'm going to read a passage dealing with Winston's access and understanding of history. And the key thing that matters is the aspect of history that's focused on here on page 33 is a discussion of which nation or which kind of empire Oceania has been at war with. And the key thing is that Winston has become aware and can remember that what they claimed yesterday, so to speak, is not what they're claiming today. The whole goal of this regime is to prevent you from becoming aware that anything ever changed, right? By the falsifying the past documents, so that if you were to look back to them as a reference point to say, oh, in 1492, we were at war with so-and-so, that document would be changed. It's exactly what Winston does, right, in the Ministry of Truth. That document would say, oh, no, actually, we're at war with this people. And you're sitting there and your mind is boggled. You can't understand what's going on. So at the bottom of page 33, he says, the narrator says, since about this time, war had been literally continuous. Though strictly speaking, it had not always been the same war. For several months during his childhood, there had been a confused street fighting in London itself, some of which he remembered vividly. But to trace out the history of the whole period, to say who was fighting whom at any given moment, would have been utterly impossible, since no written record and no spoken word ever made mention of any other alignment than the existing one. And the existing one, to be honest, we don't even really fully know what the existing one is. All we have are appearances or images or representations. At this moment, for example, in 1984, if it was 1984, think for a second just how disorienting it would be to not even be certain of the time that you're living in. In 1984, Oceania was at war with Eurasia and in alliance with Eastasia. And these roughly map onto kind of Oceania being something like the EU and also Canada and America, kind of European, Western European. And then Eurasia maps onto the Soviet bloc, including starting with the Russia and its satellites. And then East Asia is centered around the Chinese communist regime. In no public or private utterance was it ever admitted that the three powers had at any time been grouped along different lines. Actually, as Winston well knew, it was only 4 years since Oceania had been at war with Eastasia and in alliance with Eurasia. But that was merely a piece of furtive knowledge which he happened to possess because his memory was not satisfactorily under control. You can see there's the problem with this character. He's kind of a nail that sticks up that the regime is going to have to nail back down. Officially, the change of partners had never happened. Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Officially, the change never happened. How do we know that something has changed? This is a really interesting perceptual question. We have to have time A and time B, and then to be able to bring those facts together in juxtaposition or in contrast with one another, right? If we can't see the clear distinction between A and B, then if we don't see that juxtaposition side by side, then all of a sudden it gets blurred and it becomes unclear, right? Officially, the change of partners had never happened. Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Therefore, Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia. Of course, because that's what they tell us. The enemy of, if this book doesn't inspire you to want to know the world under your own devices and not just accept what other people tell you is the case, I don't know what book would do that. The enemy of the moment always represented absolute evil, and it followed that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. So the war effort is really connected in with the week of hate, because the enemy in the war establishes a figure or a nation or a people that you can hate and redirect your frustrations from your own regime onto them. Why do they cultivate hate? Do they think people are unhappy in this society? Yes. The regime knows that these people are unhappy, so they have to take measures to direct those frustrations in ways that aren't going to be harmful to the regime. They're going to be beneficial to it. The frightening thing, he reflected, for the 10,000th time, as he forced his shoulders painfully back, with his hands on his hips and gyrating. They were gyrating their bodies from the waist, an exercise that was supposed to be good for the back muscles. The frightening thing was that it might all be true. If the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event, it never happened, then that surely was more terrifying than mere torture and death. If the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event, it never happened, that surely was more terrifying than mere torture or death. Let's be more specific. If the party could thrust its hand into your own past and say the feelings and the memories you have about your own life are not true, that would be doubly terrifying. And that's exactly what they do. And that's exactly why Winston is on this kind of quest with this diary. The party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. He, Winston Smith, knew that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia as short time ago as 4 years ago. Now, how does he know this when everybody else doesn't? It's two reasons. Number one, he has a concern to latch himself on to what is true. Right? It's his compass. It's his anchor. And then the other thing is he works in the Ministry of Truth. So he is aware of the very process by which the past is altered and changed. But where did this knowledge exist? Where did this knowledge exist? We can't keep everything in our head. We need external mnemonics to root our memories in concrete things, to help verify that our memories are accurate. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, but where did this knowledge exist? Only in his own consciousness, which in any case must soon be annihilated. I think that means pretty literally. And if all others accept the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Did it really become truth, folks? No. Yes. No. Well, what is it? Is truth determined by a 51% majority? Or is truth based on what actually happens in the real world? I don't know. You have to figure that out. Who controls the past? Ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present? Controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, never had been altered. So here's the great kind of doublethink here. The past had been altered, but the past is not alterable. Because the real past is what it is. It's just the truth. You can't alter it, right? But the past, as represented in books, in films, has. Whatever was true now, was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it in Newspeak Doublethink. Stand easy, barked the instructor. So he's in the middle of these calisthenic routines. A little more genially, Winston sank his arms to the sides and slowly refilled his lungs with air. His mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink. To know and not to know. To be conscious of complete truthfulness without telling carefully constructed lies. To hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled each other out, knowing them to be contradictory, and believing in both of them. To use logic against logic. To repudiate morality while laying claim to it. To believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy. To forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety. Consciously to induce unconsciousness, and once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis. You had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. So if you don't understand what's just been said, that's the exact point. Because doublethink defies the basic sense of logic. There's a basic principle in logic of non-contradiction. The light switch cannot both be on and off simultaneously. One position, two positions, double. Doublethink precisely means that something can both be and not be at the same time, depending on what the state dictates should be the case. So, you see the connection here between truth and logic, right? The truth must be consistent with the principle or the rule of non-contradiction, right? Lies, right? What goes with lies, which is to say not truth, also goes with its new logic. And its new logic is not the principle of non-contradiction, it's the principle of contradiction, and that simultaneous things can both be true, which is contrary to your most basic understanding of thinking about things. So if we move to page 37 here, he talks about his work in the Ministry of Truth. So it's it's chapter 4 of book 1, right? So on page 37, so he's describing the physical plant of his work environment, right? And he talks about these things called memory holes, right? And this is a motif that people have picked up and still use in our language today. Similar slits existed in thousands or tens of thousands throughout the building, not only in every room, but at short intervals in every corridor. For some reason, they were nicknamed memory holes. When one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of paper, of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in, whereupon it would be whirled away on a current of warm air to the enormous furnaces which were hidden somewhere in the recesses of the building. So what do? They cut out true bits of the news, and then they change them, like kind of cut and paste, and then they flush them. So this is all on the internet now, and think how fluid the internet is, how terrifying that is in terms of changing the facts that are out there. It's the information is flushed, and they don't want it lying around because they don't want people seeing the truth anymore. Not even the workers have to get exposed to the process of the lies, because they're tasked with fabricating the evidence, right? But so if there's any of scrap of truth, it goes down the memory hole. So this is not just an idea that captures the way in which documents disappear, but also the cognitive consequences for us. It goes down the memory hole. It vanishes. It's flushed down like the kind of memory trash can, like out of the computer, and it's no longer there. So on page 39, this is really crucial, there is a vivid description of this process of editing the past and its implications. So the bottom of page 39 and on to 40. What happened in the unseen labyrinth to which the pneumatic tubes led, he did not know in detail, but he did know in general terms. As soon as all the corrections which happened to be necessary in a particular number of the Times, right, so he ties this to the London Times, the big newspaper, right, for us this would be the New York Times, this would be the Washington Post, right, the Wall Street Journal is being edited here, and, wow, let's just keep reading here. The number would be reprinted, the original copy destroyed, and the corrected copy placed in the files in its stead. There would be no original ever kept. So to whatever extent that original newspaper reported real facts, they would be gone in the sands of time. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any ideological significance. So think about it with our political correctness. For us today, there are certain ideas that are are all kinds of ideas that are not polite in mixed company or what have you, but that express something true about what people think. So what if there are things that happened in the past that we today, because of our political correctness, we find so inappropriate that we don't want to just condemn them? The best way to condemn them is to eliminate them from existence. So we'll go back into all our history, all the great literature. Let's go into Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and edit out the words we don't like and make the book into something else. And we can all sit there and pretend that, you know, nobody ever said these words and that these ideas and feelings and attitudes and rules never existed. And the only thing that existed was our kind of perfect utopian state of now, right? Mankind has progressed, right? So by having progressed beyond like the primitive Middle Ages in the ancient world, we have the right to destroy it all, right? Because those people were blinkered and ignorant and unenlightened, and we are the enlightened ones. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. Think about that. I mean, that's Newspeak right there, because the past isn't being brought up to date. The past is being destroyed, or at least records of the past. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown to be documentary evidence to have been correct. Nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a pamphlet, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. A pamphlet is it's a surface where you can write and then scrape it off, like a chalkboard. Right, and he's talking about the tabula rasa, scraping the slate clean and rewriting it to suit the needs of the party at the present and for the future. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. The largest section of the records department, far larger than the one which Winston worked, consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. A number of the times which might, because of changes in political alignment or mistaken prophecies uttered by Big Brother, have been rewritten a dozen times, still took on the file bearings its original date, and no other copy existed to contradict it. Books also were recalled and rewritten again and again, and were invariably reissued without any admission that any alteration had been taken. This is the key thing. The party changes everything, but then they conceal that anything has ever been changed, and they make it very difficult for anyone to be aware that there was a change. And that constitutes the real problem of this regime cognitively and in terms of our concern for the truth. Think about our history books. Our history books are constantly being revised, and if you look at a history book of World War II from the time it was fought to now, you'll notice that there are dramatic differences in the way the story of the war is interpreted and understood. Even the written instructions which Winston received, and which he invariably got rid of as soon as he had dealt with them, never stated or implied that any act of forgery was to be committed. Always the reference was to slips, errors, misprints, or misquotations, which it was necessary to put right in the interests of accuracy. These things weren't mistakes or misprints or typos or errors. They were the truth, but now they're being justified to be removed as if they were false. But actually, he thought, as he readjusted the Ministry of Plenty's figures, it was not even forgery. It was merely the substitution of one piece of nonsense for the other. Most of the material that you were dealing with had no connection with anything in the real world, not even the kind of connection that is contained in a direct lie. So Newspeak, history is written in words, in language. You control the history, you can control people's minds. But if you really want to control, you don't just control the history, you control the very medium with which they express and represent the world and think, right? History is a certain subject matter of representation, right? Representation of the past. Here we're not talking about alteration of the subject matter from truth to false. We're talking about the medium, altering the very medium used to express the world around us, the past of our own regime, and the past of our own lives, right? So this is from the appendix of the text, which is really part of the novel itself. It's called The Principles of Newspeak. It starts on page 299. And it says this: Newspeak was the official language of Oceania and had been devised to meet the ideological needs of INSOC, or English socialism. Newspeak. Why is it called Newspeak? There's two reasons, I think. On one hand, it's contrasted with Old Speak, right? Old Speak is what? It's the normal English language with its full breadth and texture and vocabulary and capacity to both articulate experience, and therefore it allows us to have those experiences. If we can't think certain things and certain experiences, we cannot have them, right? The words, the medium of the words is essential to be able to experiencing those things that are in part derivative of the words, because the words divide and dissect and experience in a way that allows us to see things that without words we can't see. So it's new, it's the hip thing, it's the latest thing, but it's also newspeak in the sense of it's not just new speak, it's news speak. It's the language of the representation of daily life in this world. So if we go to the bottom of page 299, it says this: the purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of Ingsoc, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. So what is language doing? It's not just allowing you to describe the world in one way or another, but it is shaping your ideological or your cognitive worldview, right? The language that you have at your disposal is going to shape what you think and what of the world and what you think you find in the world. And the goal is not just to regulate that, but also in the process of controlling and shaping your worldview and your mental habits, but to eliminate any other way of thinking or feeling about the world. Think about what history really is if you take it seriously. History is a series of epochs of human civilization that represent fundamentally distinct ways of thinking, feeling, describing, understanding the world, and living in it. And it's all that different way of living in it, that different way of life is manifest through its language first and foremost. The words that are used. Right? Page 300. It was intended that when Newspeak had been adopted once and for all, and Old Speak forgotten, a heretical thought, that is, a thought diverging from the principles of Ingsoc, should be literally unthinkable, at least so far as thought is dependent on words. So obviously there's some thoughts that aren't, and cognitive states that are not dependent on language. But civilization, culture, is built on thoughts communicated in language. If you can't communicate it in language, you're going to have a tough time communicating it. If you don't have the word for it, you cannot think it. So what kind of things do they want to eliminate? They want to eliminate certain thoughts. Think about like freedom, or love. These are concepts that the regime is trying to do away with. And notice that Newspeak, in its very fabric, is designed to advance the principles of English socialism. Political correctness works in exactly the same way. Number one, it wants you to think in a certain way by saying certain words are politically incorrect and forbidden. Right? Forbidden. Then, by saying certain things are forbidden, it inhibits you from thinking those other ways because you've been terrified to say that you can't think that way. Right? So, it says this was done partly by the invention of new words, but chiefly the strategy of Newspeak was partly done by the invention of new words, but primarily by eliminating undesirable words and by stripping such words as remained of unorthodox meaning not consistent with the principles of Insoc, and so far as possible of all secondary meanings whatsoever. To give a simple example, the word free still existed in Newspeak, but it cannot be used in such statements as, this dog is free from lice, or this field is free from weeds. It could not be used in its old sense of politically free or intellectually free, since political and intellectual freedom no longer existed, even as the concepts were therefore of necessity nameless. Quite apart from the suppression of the definitely heretical words, reduction of vocabulary was regarded as an end in itself, and no word that could be dispensed with was allowed to survive. Newspeak was designed not to extend but to diminish the range of thought, and this purpose was indirectly assisted by cutting the choice of words down to a minimum. Let's take, for example, the word love. It either doesn't exist or doesn't exist in the full meaning of our understanding of it. And this is exactly why he struggles to understand his feelings toward Julia. He has thoughts, but they're not they're impulses more than they are coherent thoughts in words. Precisely because he can't translate the emotional impulses into language, because Newspeak doesn't allow him that. So this section comes from page 52, and I'm going to start back on page 50. He's having a conversation with a man he works with, Sim, and they have the 11th edition, the definitive edition of Newspeak, at their desks. They are intellectual workers. They are workers with language, so therefore they have this dictionary as part of their profession and their expertise. And they're now talking, they're each having a conversation about Newspeak and its implications. Just kind of move this down here. And Sim says this, the 11th edition is the definitive edition, he said. We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else, and nobody will think anything else. And it will all be based on what the party finds acceptable. Totalitarian control, lies. When we've finished with it, people like you will have to learn it over again. People like you. So everyone Smith encounters, except for O'Brien, is afraid of the kind of intellectual curiosity that Winston has, because it's a threat to think that way, because you're going to get in trouble for it. And they don't want to be around him because he's a free thinker. When we're finished with it, people like you will have to learn it all over again. You think, I dare say, that our chief job is inventing new words. But not a bit of it. We're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them every day. This is like the parallel to, the concentration camps and liquidating human beings. They're liquidating the language. Not only are they killing human beings, but they're trying literally to destroy the breadth and range of human experience and the pleasures and joys and pains and ideas and thoughts that we can have, trying to eliminate them. Reduces to this kind of primitive automata. We're cutting the language down to the bone. The 11th edition won't contain a single word that will become obsolete before the year 2050. It says, it's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the great wastage is in the verbs and adjectives. But there are hundreds of nouns that we can get rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms. There are also antonyms, right? So obviously you can get rid of synonyms because they mean the same thing. What do you need two words that mean the same thing for? And antonyms, so he talks about good and bad. What do you need good and bad for? You can have good and not good, right? After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other words? Well, are they simply opposite? The answer is no. They give nuanced meanings that while they're opposite, still are not simply the full meaning is not simply the opposite of the other. A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? Ungood will do just as well. Better, because it's an exact opposite. See, there's the point, that bad is not an exact opposite. It has levels of meaning or nuances of meaning that aren't simply about it being opposite. Ungood will do just as well. Better because it's exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, what sense is there in having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent and splendid and all the rest, plus good will do just fine for me? First of all, you see how ugly this language is. And you take away the words excellent and splendid, and let's put it this way, you will no longer have experiences of that which is excellent and splendid. And I think excellent and splendid are both excellent and splendid words. Plus good covers the meaning, or double plus good. Now that's like with sugar on top, right? If you want something still stronger. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there'll be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words. In reality, only 1 word. It's no accident that what's focused on here are moral terms, right? And terms of attributions of worth to the world. Because this is the essence. I mean, language makes judgments about what's good and bad in the world, just like we make judgments in laws, in morals, and so on. A sort of vapid eagerness flitted across Winston's face at the mention... In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words, in reality only 1. Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston? It was B.B.'s idea originally, of course. He added as an afterthought, BB is Big Brother. And just by making it BB, it makes it very anonymous and unclear. It removes this more sinister expression, Big Brother, and the implications of that. A sort of vapid eagerness flitted across Winston's face at the mention of Big Brother. Nevertheless, Sim immediately detected a certain lack of enthusiasm. You haven't a real appreciation of Newspeak, Winston, he said almost sadly. Even when you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. So he has to think in translation, where when you get used to a language, you no longer have to think in translation. I've read some of those pieces that you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough. I guess they're not plus good or double plus good. But they're translations. In your heart, you'd prefer to stick to old speak with all its vagueness and its useless shades of meaning. Well, let me tell you, you eliminate the words that have shades of meaning that articulate experience, and you eliminate those shades of experience. You eliminate the human being from being able to have them. You don't grasp the beauty of the destruction of words. Do you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year? Winston did know that, of course. He smiled sympathetically. He hoped, not trusting himself to speak. It's not just words that are being eliminated. It's whole genres of the use of language and words as found in books. Like he'll talk about Shakespeare and Chaucer and Milton and Byron. Smith bit off another fragment of the dark-colored bread, chewed it briefly, and went on. Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined, and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Now, what's the problem? If you think about how language works, language is a response to experience. Experience is infinite. Therefore, language is constantly trying to capture up to experience, and every new experience is a new application of a word. Meaning is use, and therefore, as we use words in different contexts, different experiences, the shades of the meanings expand indefinitely. The meaning of words is potentially indefinite or infinite. By sucking away all those nuances of meaning and fixing it, it's going to say that we're going to have blinders on. We're only going to have one experience. All of us are going to have the same experience because we're all going to have the same language to articulate it. Already in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point, but the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Oh boy. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Consciousness, cognition. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime, right? Thinking a certain word will be a thought crime. Free thought is a thought crime. This is political correctness. And political correctness originates out of totalitarian Soviet thought. It's merely a question of self-discipline. Reality control. Word control is really reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need even for that. The revolution will be complete when the language is perfect. What does that mean? There will be no revolting against the revolution, because there will be no ability to conceive anything other than the order of English socialism created by the revolution. Newspeak is Ingsoc, and Ingsoc is Newspeak, he added with a sort of mythical sense. See, this guy has bought hook, line, and sinker. This character is like, he is deep in the psychosis of the kind of groupthink and the conformity of, the political persuasion here. You probably met a lot of people like this who are so convinced, and they just spout it all out, and they can't even respond when you raise a counterpoint, because they don't even have the cognitive awareness and the perspective to take it into consideration. Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who can understand such a conversation as we're having now? Except, began Winston doubtfully, and then stopped. It was on the tip of his tongue to say, except the proles, but he checked himself, not feeling fully certain that this remark was not in some way unorthodox. So what we're talking about here is a thought orthodoxy. Orthodox is right, literally right belief or right thinking, right opinion. Ortho meaning right, like right angle, orthogonal. So this is all the language, in our world, language constantly permits breaking the orthodoxy. Here we're going to have a language that will force everybody to be orthodox because they have no way of thinking outside of the orthodoxy. That is utterly terrifying. The proles are not human beings, he said carelessly. By 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of Old Speak will have disappeared. Now, what does that really mean to have all? It means all the literature that helped transmit that language will be gone as well. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, they'll exist only in Newspeak versions. Can you imagine that? That's torture. Not merely changed into something different, but actually changed into something contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconscious. And by that, when he says think, I think he means like actively reflect for yourself. Orthodoxy is not thinking because you are told what to think and you don't have to do the thinking for yourself. You are a perfect sheep or sheeple. One of these days, thought Winston, with a sudden deep conviction, Sim will be vaporized. What does vaporized mean? He'll be murdered, executed. But vaporized is a kind of euphemism for death here. He is too intelligent, he sees too clearly, and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. One day he will disappear. It is written in his face. And of course, Winston, Simmy is probably looking at Winston and saying the same thing, if he's that perspicuous. This remark that, the party will vaporize Sim. He sees too clearly, he speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. This reminds me of jury duty. If you speak intelligently and coherently, like you can track and follow what is going on, and you may be even able to understand the law that pertains to a case, you can be guaranteed that you will not be a juror on that case, because they only want people who are, for the most part, are blinkered or emotional, or the lawyer is going to be able to manipulate in the way they like. And this is exactly what this society wants. The society wants sheeple who do not think for themselves. And you can tell that our own media wants the same thing because of the bald-faced lies it tells, and that they actually think that many, many millions of people believe them. And it's quite appalling. And I suppose it would only be appalling to you is if you really had a serious concern for the truth and that you thought that the truth mattered. So I'll just leave you with this question. Does it matter that your own society, your own political community, your own family, yourself, does it really matter that we live our life in relationship to the truth at all? Does that really matter?